The sound of metal grinding against metal echoed through the desert air as Maya Chen adjusted the wrench on the Cessna's engine mount. Her coveralls were stained with hydraulic fluid, and her black hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail that had seen better days. To anyone passing through Desert Springs, Nevada, she was just Emma Rodriguez, a competent aircraft mechanic who kept the town's small fleet of tourist planes and charter aircraft running smoothly. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But every morning at 5:30 a.m., when she fired up the coffee maker in her tiny hangar office, Maya would glance at the framed photograph hidden behind her toolbox. 6 pilots in full flight gear standing proudly in front of an F-35 Lightning II, their faces young and determined. Wing Squadron, the military's most elite stealth fighter unit. In the center of that photograph, wearing lieutenant bars and the call sign Phoenix stitched across her chest, stood a woman who officially no longer existed. The early morning silence of Desert Springs was broken only by the distant hum of traffic on the old Route 66 highway and the occasional rumble of military aircraft from Nellis Air Force Base 40 miles to the south. Maya had chosen this location carefully when she disappeared 8 years ago. Close enough to aviation that her cover story made sense, far enough from active military installations that she could blend into the background noise of civilian life. The town's 3,200 residents were mostly retirees, Route 66 enthusiasts, and tourism workers who asked few questions and minded their own business. Maya's transformation from Phoenix to Emma had been complete and methodical. She'd traded her officers' quarters for a converted hangar apartment, her F-35 for a collection of aging civilian aircraft that she maintained with the same precision she'd once applied to multi-million-dollar stealth fighters. Her neighbors knew her as quiet, reliable, and surprisingly skilled with any aircraft that rolled into her shop. What they didn't know was that those skills had been honed in classified training programs where failure meant death and success meant missions that never appeared in any official record. The deception had become second nature. When tourists asked about her experience with aircraft, she'd mention a stint with civilian contractors and change the subject. When the occasional military personnel from Nellis stopped by for unofficial maintenance on personal aircraft, she kept conversations strictly professional and avoided any mention of her own service record. She'd even developed a slight accent that matched her assumed Hispanic heritage, complete with a backstory about growing up in Phoenix and learning aviation from her grandfather's crop dusting business. But some habits died hard. Every morning, Maya performed a security sweep of her property, with the systematic thoroughness of someone trained in counter-surveillance. She varied her daily routines in subtle ways that would confuse anyone attempting to establish patterns. Her workshop was organized with military precision, tools arranged by function and frequency of use. Most tellingly, she maintained a level of physical fitness that had nothing to do with wrenching on aircraft engines, and everything to do with staying ready for a life she'd tried to leave behind. The town itself seemed frozen in time, a perfect place for someone who needed to disappear. Main Street consisted of Murphy's Diner, where the same 6 regulars showed up for coffee every morning at exactly 7 a.m., a vintage motel that catered to Route 66 nostalgia seekers, and a collection of shops selling everything from Native American jewelry to authentic Western wear made in China. The Desert Winds Airport sat 2 miles outside town, a modest facility with 2 runways and a control tower that operated on reduced hours. Maya had purchased hangar space there under her assumed identity, using carefully crafted documentation that would pass casual inspection but wouldn't survive serious federal scrutiny. Her daily routine was deliberately mundane. Coffee at 6, workshop open by 7, lunch at Murphy's Diner where she sat at the counter and exchanged pleasantries with Dolores, the waitress who'd been serving coffee and gossip for 30 years. Afternoons were spent on maintenance work, evenings reading technical manuals and aviation journals in her apartment above the hangar. To the outside world, Emma Rodriguez was exactly what she appeared to be, a competent, unremarkable aircraft mechanic living a quiet life in a forgotten desert town. What the residents of Desert Springs didn't see were the modifications Maya had made to her living space. The apartment appeared normal enough. Basic furniture, a small kitchen, bookshelves filled with aviation manuals and mystery novels. But behind a false wall in the bedroom closet was a cache that told a different story entirely. Military-grade communication equipment. Encrypted hard drives containing classified information she'd compiled before her disappearance. Documentation for 3 different false identities, complete with passports and financial records. And, wrapped in oilcloth, maintained with the same care she gave to aircraft engines, was her old flight suit with Phoenix still stitched across the chest. Maya had vanished from military service under circumstances that remained classified at levels above most generals' clearance. Wing Squadron had been disbanded suddenly following what official reports described as quote, training accidents that killed half the unit's pilots. Survivors were reassigned to different commands, scattered across the globe to prevent them from comparing notes about missions that had never officially happened. Maya Chen's service record showed an honorable discharge following injuries sustained in a classified training exercise. Emma Rodriguez's life began exactly 6 months later, when a quietly competent aircraft mechanic set up shop in Desert Springs and began building a reputation for reliability and discretion. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd ended up maintaining the same type of aircraft she'd once flown in combat, just older and less sophisticated versions. The principles remained the same: hydraulics, avionics, flight control systems, but without the classified modifications that turned civilian aircraft into instruments of national defense. Sometimes, when working alone in the hangar late at night, Maya would find herself moving through maintenance procedures that had no civilian application, muscle memory from a life where every detail could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The first sign that her carefully constructed anonymity was cracking came on a Tuesday morning when the UPS truck made an unusual stop at her hangar. Maya rarely received packages, and when she did, they were typically aircraft parts or technical manuals ordered from legitimate suppliers under her assumed identity. But this package was different. No return address, hand-delivered by a driver who seemed unusually interested in confirming her identity before getting her signature. Inside the brown paper wrapping was a manila envelope containing a single photograph and a folded note. The photograph showed a stealth aircraft unlike any design Maya had ever seen, angular and predatory, photographed at what appeared to be a remote desert facility. The configuration was clearly experimental, incorporating design elements from several different classified programs. But it was the note that made her blood run cold. The message was brief and unsigned. "Phoenix, we know what you are really doing in Stormwing. This prototype represents everything you fought against. It's going to the highest bidder in 72 hours unless stopped. Your former squadron leader Hawk is involved, but not by choice. They have his family. Coordinates attached. Come alone, or watch everything you sacrificed for be sold to enemies of the state." Maya stared at the photograph for several minutes, her trained eye picking out details that confirmed her worst fears. The aircraft's design incorporated stealth technology that was years ahead of anything she'd known during her active service. More disturbing were the markings visible on the fuselage, experimental designations that suggested this wasn't just a prototype, but an operational weapons platform. Someone had taken classified American stealth technology and weaponized it for sale to foreign buyers. The coordinates referenced in the note led to a section of the Mojave Desert that Maya recognized from her Stormwing days. During classified missions, the squadron had used remote facilities scattered across Nevada and California for training exercises that officially never happened. Most of those locations had been decommissioned and abandoned when the program ended, but apparently, someone had found new uses for the infrastructure. Captain James Mitchell, callsign Hawk, had been Maya's squadron leader during her final year with Stormwing. He was career military, devoted to his wife Sarah and their twin daughters, and absolutely incapable of voluntarily betraying his country. If Hawk was involved in selling stealth technology, it was because someone was using his family as leverage. The implication was clear: whoever had orchestrated this operation understood exactly how to manipulate former Stormwing personnel. Maya's first instinct was to contact federal authorities and report the threat, but her rational mind quickly dismissed that option. Her current identity wouldn't survive federal scrutiny, and explaining how she knew about classified stealth technology would require revealing her own hidden past. More importantly, if Hawk's family was being held hostage, involving official channels would likely result in their deaths and the loss of critical intelligence about who was behind the operation. The smart move would be to maintain her cover, destroy the evidence, and continue living as Emma Rodriguez. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She'd built a good life in Desert Springs, complete with genuine friendships and the satisfaction of honest work. Getting involved in whatever conspiracy had ensnared Hawk would mean risking everything she'd worked to create, and possibly exposing herself to the same people who'd forced her to disappear 8 years ago. But as Maya sat in her hangar office, staring at the photograph of the stolen stealth aircraft, she realized that walking away wasn't really an option. The technology represented in that prototype could shift the balance of power in global conflicts, giving hostile nations capabilities that would take decades to counter. More personally, Hawk had saved her life during missions she couldn't officially acknowledge, and his family was paying the price for someone else's betrayal. Maya walked to her apartment and began making preparations that she'd hoped never to use again. From the hidden cache behind the false wall, she retrieved communication equipment and began monitoring encrypted frequencies she'd memorized during her Stormwing service. The airwaves revealed increased military activity around several classified facilities, suggesting that someone in authority was already aware of the theft and attempting to track down the stolen technology. The flight suit felt strange after 8 years of civilian clothes, lighter than she remembered but perfectly fitted to her still athletic frame. As Maya checked the suit's integrated systems, she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back wasn't Emma Rodriguez, the quiet aircraft mechanic. This was Phoenix, and Phoenix had never walked away from a mission that needed completing. Her Cessna had been modified far beyond what any casual observer would notice. The engine had been upgraded with components that technically weren't available to civilian operators. The avionics included navigation and communication systems that operated on frequencies reserved for military use. Most importantly, the aircraft's performance envelope had been enhanced to levels that would surprise anyone familiar with standard Cessna specifications. Maya had spent years gradually implementing these modifications, always careful to source components through channels that wouldn't attract attention. As she performed her pre-flight inspection, Maya's mind automatically shifted into mission planning mode. The coordinates led to a facility approximately 200 miles northeast of Desert Springs, in terrain that would challenge even experienced desert pilots. The approach would require flying at extremely low altitude to avoid radar detection, threading between mountain ranges that left little margin for error. Once on the ground, she'd be operating alone against an unknown number of hostiles with access to military-grade weapons and possibly air support. The rational part of her mind cataloged all the ways this mission could go wrong. She was 8 years out of practice with combat flying. She had no backup, no extraction plan, and no official support if things went sideways. The enemy had the advantage of prepared positions, superior numbers, and detailed knowledge of her capabilities. From a tactical standpoint, this was exactly the kind of mission that Stormwing had been designed to handle with full squadron support, not a solo operation by a pilot who'd been officially dead for nearly a decade. But Maya had learned during her Stormwing service that sometimes the impossible missions were the only ones worth flying. As she started the Cessna's engine and began taxiing toward the runway, she felt the familiar calm that preceded combat. For 8 years, she'd been living someone else's life. Now it was time to remember who she really was. The takeoff from Desert Winds Airport was routine enough to avoid attracting attention. But once airborne, Maya began implementing flight patterns that had nothing to do with civilian aviation. She stayed below radar coverage, using terrain masking and electronic countermeasures to avoid detection by military tracking systems. The Cessna responded to her touch with precision that bordered on telepathic, every control input translating into exactly the aircraft movement she intended. As she flew through the desert landscape toward an uncertain confrontation with an unknown enemy, Maya couldn't help but reflect on the irony of her situation. 8 years ago, she'd walked away from this life because the cost of serving had become too high. Now she was voluntarily returning to the same dangerous world, not because she had to, but because someone she cared about needed her help. Perhaps that was the real difference between Phoenix and Emma. Phoenix fought for duty and orders, but Emma fought for people who mattered. The coordinates were still 50 miles away when Maya's communication equipment detected encrypted transmissions, suggesting that her approach hadn't gone completely unnoticed. Someone was tracking her progress, but whether they were friend or foe remained to be determined. In the distance, she could see the angular silhouettes of mountains that concealed the facility where Hawk was presumably being held. and where stolen stealth technology was about to change hands with America's enemies. Maya Chen had spent 8 years being invisible, but Phoenix was about to remind the world that some people were very dangerous to ignore. The facility appeared exactly as Maya remembered from her Stormwing days, though 8 years of abandonment had taken their toll on the infrastructure. Concrete runways cracked by desert heat stretched across the valley floor, flanked by deteriorating hangars that had once housed America's most classified aviation projects. What struck her immediately was how much activity the supposedly abandoned base was showing. Vehicle tracks crisscrossed the tarmac, temporary lighting had been strung between buildings, and she could see at least 3 aircraft parked near the main hangar complex. Maya brought the Cessna down in a controlled descent that used the surrounding mountains to mask her approach from radar. The landing was rougher than she would have preferred, but the aircraft held together as she rolled to a stop behind a cluster of abandoned fuel tanks that would provide concealment while she conducted reconnaissance. The desert silence was broken only by the cooling engine and the distant sound of generators powering the temporary installations. Through binoculars liberated from her Stormwing emergency kit, Maya surveyed the facility with the systematic thoroughness of someone trained in tactical assessment. The main hangar doors were partially open, revealing glimpses of the stealth prototype from the photograph. Even at this distance, she could see technicians working around the aircraft, preparing it for what appeared to be final systems checks before delivery. More concerning were the armed security personnel positioned at strategic points around the perimeter, their equipment and positioning suggesting military or paramilitary training. The temporary command structure had been established in what used to be the base operations building, its windows now covered with blackout materials and multiple antenna arrays sprouting from the roof. Maya counted at least 12 vehicles in the motor pool, a mix of civilian SUVs and military-style trucks that suggested a substantial operational team. This wasn't a simple theft and resale operation. Someone had invested serious resources in converting the abandoned facility into a functional forward operating base. Movement near the operations building caught her attention, and Maya adjusted her binoculars to focus on a group of figures emerging into the harsh desert sunlight. The man in the center was unmistakably Captain James Mitchell, though he looked considerably older and more haggard than she remembered. Hawk walked with the careful posture of someone under constant surveillance, flanked by 2 armed escorts who maintained professional spacing but never relaxed their vigilance. Even from her concealed position, Maya could see the stress lines etched into Hawk's face and the way his shoulders carried the weight of impossible choices. This was a man being coerced into betraying everything he'd sworn to protect, and the knowledge was eating him alive from the inside. The escorts guided him toward a smaller building that Maya recognized as former enlisted quarters, presumably where he was being held when not needed for whatever technical expertise the operation required. Maya's tactical assessment painted a grim picture of the challenges ahead. The facility was heavily guarded by professionals who clearly understood the value of what they were protecting. Any direct assault would result in immediate retaliation against Hawk, and likely the execution of whatever leverage they were using to ensure his cooperation. The smart approach would be stealth infiltration, but that meant leaving her aircraft exposed and vulnerable to discovery. As she studied the enemy positions, Maya's enhanced hearing picked up the distant sound of rotor blades approaching from the south. A helicopter materialized over the mountain ridge, its configuration immediately recognizable as a military transport variant typically used for covert operations. The aircraft settled onto the main runway with practiced precision, disgorging a group of passengers who moved with the disciplined efficiency of special operations personnel. The new arrivals were met by a figure Maya hadn't noticed before. A tall man in expensive civilian clothes whose bearing suggested command authority despite his lack of uniform. Through her binoculars, she watched him greet the helicopter passengers with handshakes and gestures that indicated familiarity and mutual respect. This was clearly the operational commander, someone with enough influence to coordinate between military assets and civilian contractors. The commander's attention was focused on a briefcase carried by one of the helicopter passengers, its contents apparently representing the final piece of whatever transaction was taking place. Maya realized she was witnessing the endgame of a carefully orchestrated operation that had been months, or possibly years in planning. The stealth prototype wasn't just being sold. It was being delivered to specific buyers who had the resources and expertise to exploit its advanced capabilities. Maya's communication equipment crackled with encrypted transmissions as the new arrivals established contact with their handlers. The frequencies were military-grade, confirming her suspicion that this operation involved active-duty personnel operating outside official channels. More disturbing was the realization that someone with access to classified communication protocols was coordinating the sale of American stealth technology to hostile foreign interests. The technical discussion taking place around the prototype aircraft suggested that final preparations were nearly complete. Maya could see fuel trucks positioning near the hangar, and ground crews were removing equipment that had apparently been used for systems testing and calibration. Whatever timeline the operation was following, it was accelerating toward completion, much faster than the original 72-hour estimate suggested. From her concealed position, Maya began planning her infiltration approach. The facility's original security systems had been designed to prevent unauthorized access to classified aircraft and technology, but they'd been configured for threats coming from outside the perimeter. The current occupants had established their own security measures, but they were focused on protecting against conventional assault rather than infiltration by someone with intimate knowledge of the base layout and original security protocols. Maya's Stormwing training had included extensive instruction in covert operations, since the squadron's missions often required operating in denied territory, where detection meant mission failure and likely death. The principles remained the same whether infiltrating enemy airfields or abandoned American facilities. Exploit blind spots in surveillance coverage, move during shift changes and periods of reduced alertness, and always have multiple exit strategies prepared. The guard rotation patterns became apparent after an hour of observation. Security personnel were conducting regular patrols on a predictable schedule, with gaps in coverage that occurred during shift transitions. More importantly, the guards were focused primarily on external threats and seemed less concerned about surveillance of the interior areas where Hawk was being held. This suggested overconfidence that could be exploited by someone willing to take calculated risks. Maya's approach route would take her through a drainage culvert that ran beneath the main runway, emerging near the enlisted quarters where Hawk was presumably being held. The culvert system had been part of the original base construction, designed to prevent flooding during the rare but intense desert storms. Her Stormwing briefings had included detailed facility schematics, and she was reasonably confident that the tunnels remained accessible despite years of abandonment. The infiltration began at sunset, when the harsh desert light created long shadows that would help conceal her movement. Maya left the Cessna concealed behind the fuel tanks with emergency beacons disabled and navigation systems locked to prevent unauthorized access. If this mission went sideways, she couldn't afford to give the enemy access to her modified aircraft and its enhanced capabilities. The drainage tunnel was exactly where her memory indicated, though 8 years of neglect had partially collapsed some sections and filled others with wind-blown sand and debris. Maya crawled through the confined space with painful slowness, using a small flashlight to navigate around obstacles while remaining alert for any sounds that might indicate discovery. The tunnel system was larger than she'd anticipated, suggesting that the original base construction had included provisions for covert movement that weren't documented in standard facility plans. Emergency lighting still functioned in some sections of the tunnel network, powered by backup systems that had been designed to operate independently for extended periods. Maya realized that the current occupants might not be aware of the tunnel system's existence, since their focus had been on establishing surface operations rather than exploring abandoned infrastructure. This oversight could provide the tactical advantage she needed to reach Hawk without alerting his captors. The tunnel emerged in a maintenance area beneath the enlisted quarters, exactly as her facility knowledge had predicted. Maya listened carefully for any indication of activity above, before carefully removing the access grate and climbing into what had once been a utility room. Dust and abandonment suggested that this area hadn't been explored by the current occupants, making it an ideal staging area for her rescue operation. Through the utility room's ventilation system, Maya could hear voices from the floor above indicating that the building was indeed being used to house personnel. The conversations were in English but included technical terminology that suggested both American and foreign participants in the operation. More importantly, she could identify Hawk's voice among the speakers, confirming his location and apparent health status. Maya's tactical assessment of the building layout relied on her knowledge of standard military construction protocols. Enlisted quarters typically followed predictable designs, with sleeping areas, common facilities, and administrative spaces arranged according to efficiency and security requirements. Her goal was to reach Hawk's location without alerting his guards or triggering any alarm systems that might have been installed by the current occupants. The stairwell to the upper floor was located where her memory suggested, though the door required careful manipulation to avoid the squeaking hinges that would announce her presence. Maya moved with the silent precision of someone trained in close-quarters operations. Each step planned to minimize noise while maintaining readiness for immediate action if discovery became unavoidable. The second-floor corridor stretched ahead in both directions, with numbered doors indicating individual quarters that had been converted for use by the operations personnel. Voices were emanating from Room 14, where Maya could distinguish Hawk's voice engaged in what sounded like technical discussion with at least two other individuals. The conversation's tone suggested interrogation rather than casual discussion, with Hawk providing reluctant responses to questions about stealth aircraft systems and operational capabilities. Maya positioned herself outside the door and began analyzing the tactical situation inside the room. Based on voice patterns and movement sounds, she estimated 3 individuals total: Hawk and 2 interrogators. The guards would be armed and trained, but they wouldn't be expecting an assault from inside the building. Her advantage lay in surprise and superior knowledge of the building layout, but she would need to neutralize both guards simultaneously to prevent alarm from being raised. The conversation inside the room provided valuable intelligence about the operation's scope and timeline. The interrogators were asking detailed questions about stealth aircraft countermeasures and vulnerability assessment, information that would allow hostile nations to develop effective defensive systems against American air superiority. Hawk's responses were technically accurate, but deliberately incomplete, suggesting he was providing just enough information to protect whatever leverage they held over him, while minimizing the damage to national security. Maya's enhanced hearing picked up additional details that painted a clearer picture of the coercion being used against Hawk. References to his family's location and welfare were interspersed with technical questions, confirming that his wife and daughters were being held elsewhere as insurance for his cooperation. The emotional strain in Hawk's voice suggested that his family's safety was his primary concern, overriding his military oath and personal integrity. The technical discussion also revealed that the stealth prototype was nearly ready for delivery to its foreign buyers. Final systems checks had been completed successfully, and fuel loading would begin within hours for departure to an undisclosed international destination. Maya realized that her window of opportunity was closing rapidly. If she didn't act soon, both the technology and Hawk would be beyond recovery. Maya checked her equipment and prepared for immediate action. The rescue would require speed, precision, and absolute commitment to success. She couldn't afford to hesitate or second-guess her tactical decisions once the operation began. Everything she'd learned during Stormwing training, everything she'd tried to leave behind in her civilian life, would be put to the ultimate test in the next few minutes. Her hand moved to the door handle as she prepared to breach the room and confront whatever waited inside. 8 years of hiding were about to end in a few seconds of violence that would determine whether America's most advanced stealth technology remained in friendly hands or disappeared into the arsenals of hostile nations. Maya took a deep breath and reminded herself that Phoenix had never failed to complete a mission when lives hung in the balance. The door opened silently as Maya stepped into the room where her former squadron leader was being held captive, and where the real fight for America's technological superiority was about to begin. The room erupted into chaos as Maya burst through the door with lethal precision. Her first target was the guard positioned near the window, whose attention had been focused on the facility's exterior perimeter. The man had perhaps half a second to register her presence before Maya's combat training took over, neutralizing the threat with efficiency that spoke to years of specialized instruction in close-quarters combat. The second guard was already reaching for his sidearm when Maya pivoted toward him, but her Stormwing reflexes proved superior to his conventional security training. Within moments, both guards were unconscious and secured with plastic restraints from Maya's tactical kit. The entire engagement had lasted less than 30 seconds and produced minimal noise that might alert other personnel in the building. Hawk stared at his unexpected rescuer with a mixture of disbelief and recognition that transcended the 8 years since they'd last worked together. Despite her civilian clothes and the subtle changes that time had brought to her appearance, there was no mistaking the woman who had once flown impossible missions with surgical precision and unshakable determination. "Phoenix," Hawk whispered, his voice carrying the weight of memories from operations that officially never happened. "They told us you were dead. Training accident, classified circumstances, no survivors." Maya moved quickly to cut his restraints while keeping one eye on the door and her enhanced hearing tuned for approaching footsteps. Death was easier than the alternative. We need to move now. Where's your family being held? Hawk rubbed circulation back into his wrists while providing the tactical intelligence that Maya needed to complete the rescue operation. His wife Sarah and twin daughters were being held at a secondary location approximately 50 miles south of the current facility, guarded by a skeleton crew that included at least one individual with military training. The separation was deliberate, ensuring that any rescue attempt would require splitting limited resources between multiple targets. The whole operation is being run by Colonel David Barrett, Hawk continued as they prepared to leave the room. He was Pentagon liaison during our final Stormwing missions. Apparently he's been selling classified information to a consortium of foreign buyers for the past 3 years. The stealth prototype is just his biggest score. Maya felt a cold recognition settle in her stomach. Barrett had been present during the classified briefings that preceded Stormwing's dissolution, which meant he'd had access to personnel files, mission records, and operational capabilities of every pilot in the squadron. His involvement explained how the enemy had located her despite years of careful anonymity, and why they'd been able to leverage Hawk's family with such precision. The intelligence also clarified the scope of the conspiracy they were facing. This wasn't a simple theft operation conducted by foreign agents. It was systematic betrayal by American military personnel who were monetizing classified capabilities for personal gain. Barrett's position would have given him access to emerging technologies, operational schedules, and security protocols that made large-scale espionage possible. Maya's tactical assessment shifted as she processed the implications of Barrett's involvement. The colonel would have detailed knowledge of Stormwing training and capabilities, which meant he'd be prepared for exactly the type of rescue operation she was conducting. The facility's security measures had probably been designed with specific consideration for the skills and methods that former squadron members might employ. They moved through the building's corridors with careful coordination, Maya leading with her superior knowledge of military architecture, while Hawk provided intelligence about guard positions and patrol schedules he'd observed during his captivity. The temporary occupants had established a functional security system, but they'd relied primarily on technology and personnel rather than structural modifications to the building itself. The original base communications center had been reactivated and converted into the operations command hub, its windows blocked and interior filled with sophisticated electronic equipment that suggested professional intelligence capabilities. Through brief glimpses as they passed, Maya could see multiple workstations displaying everything from satellite imagery to encrypted communication channels that connected the facility to handlers around the world. Barrett himself was visible through the command center's partially open door, a tall figure in expensive civilian clothes whose bearing still carried the unmistakable authority of career military leadership. He was engaged in animated discussion with individuals whose accents suggested international origins, apparently coordinating final preparations for the stealth prototype's delivery to its foreign buyers. Maya's enhanced hearing allowed her to pick up fragments of the conversation that confirmed her worst fears about the operation's scope. The stealth technology being sold represented years of American research and development, including classified modifications that wouldn't appear in official technical documentation for another decade. Barrett wasn't just selling current capabilities. He was providing enemies of the United States with detailed intelligence about future military aviation development. The conversation also revealed that Maya's infiltration hadn't gone completely unnoticed. Barrett was discussing increased security measures and the possibility that former squadron assets might attempt to interfere with the operation. He'd clearly anticipated that surviving Stormwing personnel might eventually discover the conspiracy and attempt to stop it, which suggested that her rescue mission was proceeding according to scenarios he'd already planned for. Hawk guided Maya through service corridors that the facility's current occupants hadn't bothered to secure, relying on his detailed observation of their operational patterns during days of captivity. The route took them past enlisted quarters that had been converted into temporary housing for the international team Barrett had assembled, offering glimpses of personnel whose equipment and bearing suggested elite military or intelligence backgrounds. The international nature of the operation became increasingly apparent as they moved through the facility. Maya observed individuals whose equipment bore markings from several different nations, all apparently united in their interest in acquiring American stealth technology. This wasn't a simple buyer-seller transaction. It was a coordinated intelligence operation involving multiple hostile foreign services working together to gain access to classified capabilities. Maya's Stormwing training included extensive instruction in identifying foreign intelligence personnel and their operational signatures. The individuals she observed possessed the disciplined bearing and specialized equipment that marked them as elite operatives rather than conventional military personnel. Their presence suggested that the stealth prototype's delivery was just one component of a larger intelligence operation designed to compromise American technological superiority. The facility's motor pool contained vehicles that told a similar story of international coordination. License plates from multiple states suggested extensive travel and logistical coordination, while specialized communication equipment indicated the ability to maintain secure contact with handlers across multiple time zones. Barrett had clearly invested substantial resources in establishing an operation capable of functioning independently from official government oversight. As they approached the hangar complex where the stealth prototype was being prepared for departure, Maya began developing tactical options for preventing its delivery to foreign buyers. The aircraft itself was heavily guarded and surrounded by technical personnel conducting final systems checks, making direct assault extremely risky. More concerning was the presence of armed security personnel, whose positioning suggested professional military training in base defense operations. Maya's analysis of the guard positions revealed a sophisticated security plan that accounted for multiple threat vectors and maintained overlapping fields of fire around critical assets. Barrett's military background was evident in the defensive arrangements, which followed established protocols for protecting high-value targets in hostile territory. Any conventional assault would result in immediate escalation and likely destruction of both the prototype and critical intelligence about the broader conspiracy. The hangar itself had been modified with temporary lighting and communication systems that supported round-the-clock operations. Maya could see fuel trucks positioned for rapid departure, suggesting that the prototype's delivery timeline was measured in hours rather than days. Technical personnel were conducting what appeared to be final pre-flight inspections, indicating that Barrett's operation was entering its terminal phase. Hawk provided additional intelligence about the prototype's capabilities based on technical discussions he'd been forced to participate in during his captivity. The aircraft incorporated stealth modifications that exceeded anything in current American operational inventory, including electronic warfare systems and radar-defeating technologies that wouldn't be deployed on conventional platforms for several years. Barrett had apparently gained access to experimental programs that remained classified at the highest levels of government. Maya realized that preventing the prototype's delivery would require more than simple sabotage or destruction. The aircraft represented months or years of development work that couldn't be easily replicated, but its loss would also eliminate critical evidence about the scope of Barrett's espionage activities. The ideal solution would involve capturing both the technology and the intelligence necessary to roll up the entire foreign network that Barrett had been supplying with classified information. The communication intercepts Maya had been monitoring revealed that Barrett's operation extended far beyond the immediate facility. References to other packages and ongoing deliveries suggested that the stealth prototype was just one of multiple intelligence products being sold to foreign buyers. Barrett had apparently established a systematic process for monetizing classified information, with the current operation representing the culmination of years of careful preparation and coordination. Maya's tactical planning had to account for the reality that Barrett would have contingency measures in place for exactly the type of interference she represented. His knowledge of Stormwing capabilities meant he'd be prepared for stealth infiltration, electronic warfare, and the type of precision operations that the squadron had specialized in. The security measures she'd observed were specifically designed to counter the tactics that she and Hawk had been trained to employ. The sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the south indicated that Barrett's timeline was accelerating even faster than anticipated. Through hangar windows, Maya could see another military transport settling onto the main runway, apparently bringing additional personnel or equipment for the prototype's final departure. The increased activity suggested that the operation was entering its most vulnerable phase, when security attention would be focused on departure preparations rather than perimeter defense. Maya's enhanced communication equipment detected encrypted transmissions that provided additional intelligence about the operation's international connections. The frequencies being used were consistent with foreign intelligence services, confirming that Barrett's buyers had the sophisticated capabilities necessary to exploit stolen stealth technology. The transmissions also revealed coordination with maritime assets, suggesting that the prototype's ultimate destination involved ocean transport to avoid detection by American tracking systems. As Maya and Hawk positioned themselves for the final phase of their operation, the scope of Barrett's betrayal became increasingly clear. This wasn't simply theft of military technology. It was systematic compromise of American technological superiority conducted by trusted personnel with access to the most classified capabilities. The stealth prototype represented years of research and development that Barrett was selling to the highest bidder. Regardless of the strategic implications for national security, Maya's mission parameters had evolved from simple rescue to prevention of catastrophic intelligence loss. The prototype's delivery would provide hostile nations with detailed understanding of American stealth capabilities, allowing them to develop countermeasures and possibly replicate the technology for their own military applications. The strategic implications extended far beyond the immediate loss of a single aircraft to potential compromise of American air superiority for decades to come. The final phase of the operation would require Maya to draw upon every aspect of her Stormwing training while operating with minimal support against a well-prepared enemy who understood her capabilities. Barrett's knowledge of squadron tactics meant that conventional approaches would likely fail, requiring innovative solutions that exploited weaknesses in his operational assumptions. The next few hours would determine whether American stealth technology remained in friendly hands or disappeared into foreign arsenals that could threaten global stability for generations to come. Maya's plan crystallized with the ruthless clarity that had made her Stormwing's most effective pilot. Rather than attempting to prevent the prototype's departure through direct confrontation, she would turn Barrett's own operation against him. The key lay in exploiting his overconfidence and the complex web of international coordination that made his conspiracy possible. From their concealed position overlooking the hangar complex, Maya began implementing a strategy that would have been impossible without her intimate knowledge of military communication protocols and Barrett's operational psychology. Her first move involved accessing the facility's communication systems to send carefully crafted messages that would sow confusion among Barrett's international partners. The abandoned base's original communication infrastructure had been designed with multiple redundant systems to ensure continuity during classified operations. Maya's Stormwing briefings had included detailed technical information about these systems, including backup frequencies and emergency protocols that Barrett's team had overlooked in their focus on establishing temporary operations. These forgotten channels would provide the access she needed to manipulate the information flow that held Barrett's conspiracy together. Hawk provided tactical support while Maya worked to penetrate the facility's electronic systems, his years of experience with classified communication equipment proving invaluable in bypassing security measures that would have stopped conventional infiltration attempts. Together, they established access to Barrett's command network without triggering the intrusion detection systems that protected the facility's primary operations. Maya's first electronic assault targeted the coordination messages flowing between Barrett's facility and his international buyers. By intercepting and subtly modifying these communications, she began creating doubt and suspicion among the foreign operatives who were expecting to receive the stealth prototype. References to, quote, authentication concerns and verification delays suggested that the American side was having second thoughts about the transaction, while hints about surveillance activity implied that the operation might have been compromised by federal authorities. The psychological manipulation was designed to exploit the natural paranoia that characterized international intelligence operations. Foreign buyers who had invested significant resources in acquiring American stealth technology would be extremely sensitive to any indication that their involvement might be discovered by United States authorities. Maya's carefully planted doubts would force them to choose between proceeding with a potentially compromised operation or withdrawing to protect their broader intelligence networks. Barrett's response to the communication disruptions provided valuable intelligence about his operational priorities and decision-making processes. Rather than investigating the source of the confusion, he focused on reassuring his buyers and maintaining the delivery timeline, suggesting that the financial aspects of the transaction were his primary concern. His willingness to ignore potential security compromises revealed a level of greed that Maya could exploit through additional psychological pressure. Maya's second phase involved creating the impression that federal authorities were closing in on Barrett's operation through coordinated surveillance and investigation. Using her knowledge of FBI and military intelligence communication protocols, she began broadcasting coded messages on frequencies that Barrett's monitoring equipment would detect, suggesting that a multi-agency task force was preparing to raid the facility. The false federal communications included references to Stormwing survivors and classified technology recovery operations that would resonate with Barrett's specific concerns about former squadron members interfering with his conspiracy. Maya was essentially conducting a sophisticated disinformation campaign designed to convince Barrett that his worst-case scenarios were becoming reality, forcing him to make increasingly desperate decisions that would create exploitable vulnerabilities. Hawk, meanwhile, had been working to access the facility's fuel storage systems, identifying potential sabotage points that could disable the prototype's departure without destroying the aircraft or alerting security personnel. His technical expertise with military aviation systems allowed him to locate critical components that could be compromised through subtle modifications rather than obvious damage that would trigger immediate investigation. The fuel contamination approach would create a situation where the prototype appeared ready for departure but would experience catastrophic engine failure during takeoff, forcing an emergency landing that would expose Barrett's entire operation to federal investigation. The timing could be controlled to ensure that the failure occurred after the aircraft was airborne but before it reached international airspace, preventing the technology from falling into foreign hands while preserving evidence of the conspiracy. Maya's monitoring of Barrett's communications revealed growing tension between the colonel and his international partners as her disinformation campaign began taking effect. Foreign buyers were demanding additional verification procedures and expressing concerns about operational security that suggested they might withdraw from the transaction entirely. Barrett's increasingly frantic efforts to maintain their confidence provided Maya with detailed intelligence about the broader network she was working to dismantle. The international scope of Barrett's conspiracy became even more apparent as Maya analyzed the communication patterns she was intercepting. The operation involved buyers from at least 4 different hostile nations, each apparently believing they were the exclusive recipients of the stolen stealth technology. Barrett had apparently been conducting multiple simultaneous negotiations, planning to auction the prototype to the highest bidder while keeping backup buyers available in case primary negotiations collapsed. Maya realized that Barrett's greed had created an inherently unstable situation that could be exploited through careful manipulation of competing interests. By selectively revealing information about multiple buyers to each participant, she could trigger a bidding war that would force Barrett's partners to expose their capabilities and intentions while competing against each other for access to the stolen technology. The psychological pressure campaign reached its peak when Maya began broadcasting detailed technical specifications about the prototype on encrypted frequencies that all of Barrett's buyers would be monitoring. The information was accurate enough to demonstrate intimate knowledge of the aircraft's capabilities, but included subtle modifications that would make any attempt to reverse engineer the technology extremely difficult. The effect was to convince each buyer that competitors were gaining access to information that should have been exclusive. Barrett's response to the escalating chaos demonstrated the psychological profile that Maya had observed during their Stormwing service together. Under pressure, the colonel became increasingly controlling and paranoid, making tactical decisions based on emotional reactions rather than careful analysis. His desperation to maintain control over the operation created opportunities for exploitation that a more disciplined adversary would never have provided. The turning point came when one of Barrett's international buyers demanded immediate verification of the prototype's authenticity through direct inspection by their technical representatives. The request forced Barrett to choose between accommodating foreign intelligence operatives on American soil or losing the most lucrative aspect of his conspiracy. His decision to allow foreign nationals access to classified military technology provided Maya with the leverage she needed to trigger federal intervention. Maya's final electronic manipulation involved sending detailed intelligence about Barrett's operation to multiple federal agencies simultaneously, using communication channels that would ensure immediate high-level attention. The information included real-time intelligence about foreign operatives on American soil, stolen military technology, and systematic betrayal by trusted military personnel. The scope and urgency of the threat would trigger an overwhelming federal response that Barrett couldn't possibly counter with his limited resources. The facility's communication system suddenly exploded with activity as federal agencies began coordinating an immediate response to Maya's intelligence package. Barrett's monitoring equipment detected encrypted transmissions from FBI, military intelligence, and national security agency assets that were converging on the abandoned base from multiple directions. The volume and intensity of the communications suggested a major federal operation that would arrive within hours rather than days. Barrett's reaction to the federal response confirmed Maya's assessment of his psychological vulnerabilities. Rather than attempting an orderly withdrawal that might have preserved some aspects of his conspiracy, the colonel became focused on completing the prototype's delivery regardless of the consequences. His decision to proceed with the transaction despite overwhelming evidence of federal attention demonstrated the kind of tunnel vision that made experienced operators extremely dangerous but also predictable. Maya watched through her surveillance equipment as Barrett's security personnel began implementing emergency protocols that suggested preparation for armed resistance against federal authorities. The decision to fight rather than flee indicated that Barrett's operation had reached a point of no return, where capture meant permanent imprisonment or worse. The escalation also meant that any remaining time for subtle manipulation had ended. The final phase would require direct action that leveraged Maya's superior tactical skills against a desperate enemy. The international buyers began withdrawing from the facility as federal communications intensified, their professional paranoia overriding their interest in acquiring the stealth technology. Maya's psychological manipulation had successfully fractured the conspiracy's international components, leaving Barrett isolated with a handful of loyal subordinates and a prototype aircraft that was rapidly becoming more liability than asset. Hawk's sabotage preparations had reached completion, just as the federal net began closing around the facility. The fuel contamination system was in place and ready for activation, while backup plans included electronic warfare measures that could disable the prototype's navigation and communication systems if it somehow managed to depart despite the compromised fuel supply. Every contingency had been planned to ensure that American stealth technology remained in American hands regardless of Barrett's desperation. Maya's enhanced communication equipment detected the approach of federal assets from multiple directions, confirming that her intelligence package had triggered exactly the type of coordinated response she'd intended. The timing was critical. Federal forces needed to arrive before Barrett could destroy evidence or eliminate witnesses, but not so quickly that the colonel would resort to immediate violence against captives or valuable intelligence. The psychological pressure on Barrett reached its peak as he realized that his carefully constructed conspiracy was collapsing around him. His communications with remaining subordinates revealed increasing desperation and willingness to take extreme measures to salvage something from the operation. Maya understood that the most dangerous phase was just beginning, as cornered operatives with nothing left to lose often made decisions that prioritized destruction over survival. Maya and Hawk prepared for the final confrontation with the knowledge that their actions in the next few hours would determine not only their own survival, but also the fate of classified technology that could reshape global military balance. Barrett's desperation made him unpredictable, but it also created opportunities for exploitation by operatives who understood both his capabilities and his psychological limitations. The sound of distant helicopters confirmed that federal forces were beginning their approach to the facility, while Barrett's increasingly frantic communications suggested that he was preparing for a final gambit that would either salvage his conspiracy or destroy everything he couldn't control. Maya felt the familiar calm that preceded combat operations, knowing that Stormwing's most important mission was about to reach its climactic moment in the desert where it had all begun years earlier. The federal helicopters materialized over the desert horizon like avenging angels, their formation tight and purposeful as they approached the abandoned facility where Barrett's conspiracy had reached its desperate conclusion. Maya watched through her surveillance equipment as the colonel made his final stand, barricading himself in the hangar with the stealth prototype and a handful of loyal subordinates who had chosen destruction over surrender. Barrett's voice crackled over the facility's communication system as he attempted to negotiate with the Federal Task Force commander, his words carrying the hollow authority of someone who no longer held any real leverage. The colonel demanded safe passage for himself and his remaining personnel in exchange for preserving the prototype aircraft, apparently believing that federal authorities would prioritize technology recovery over criminal justice. Maya recognized the tactical psychology behind Barrett's position. He was gambling that the value of the stealth prototype would outweigh the desire to prosecute his conspiracy, betting on government priorities that favored asset recovery over accountability. His miscalculation lay in underestimating how thoroughly Maya's intelligence package had documented his systematic betrayal and the scope of classified information he had sold to foreign adversaries. The federal response was swift and uncompromising. Special operations teams deployed from the helicopters with precision that spoke to extensive pre-mission planning and intelligence preparation. Maya realized that her communication intercepts had provided federal authorities with detailed real-time intelligence about the facility's layout, personnel disposition, and operational status. The tactical advantage had shifted decisively against Barrett's remaining forces. Hawk activated the fuel contamination system as federal teams began their assault on the hangar complex, ensuring that the prototype would be unable to depart even if Barrett somehow managed to reach the aircraft. The sabotage was designed to appear as mechanical failure rather than deliberate intervention, preserving the technology while preventing its escape to international buyers who might still be monitoring the situation from secure distances. Barrett's desperate gambit involved attempting to destroy the prototype rather than allow its capture by federal authorities. Maya watched him move toward the aircraft with what appeared to be explosive charges, apparently planning to eliminate the evidence of his conspiracy along with the technology he had attempted to sell. His actions confirmed the psychological profile she had developed during their Stormwing service, where Barrett's response to mission failure had always involved scorched earth tactics that prioritized denial over preservation. Maya's intervention came at the critical moment when Barrett reached the prototype with his improvised demolition equipment. Her appearance in the hangar represented the return of Phoenix, the pilot who had once been Barrett's equal in Stormwing and who now stood as the embodiment of everything his betrayal had attempted to destroy. The confrontation carried symbolic weight that transcended the immediate tactical situation. The psychological impact on Barrett was immediate and profound. Seeing Maya alive contradicted everything he had believed about the success of his conspiracy to eliminate Stormwing survivors. Her presence meant that his carefully constructed narrative about training accidents and classified casualties had been exposed as systematic murder, removing any possibility that his actions could be rationalized as protecting national security rather than pursuing personal gain. Barrett's response revealed the depth of his psychological deterioration under the pressure of exposure and imminent capture. Rather than acknowledging the futility of his position, he became fixated on completing the destruction of evidence that might implicate him in broader intelligence compromises. His tunnel vision created tactical vulnerabilities that Maya exploited with the precision that had made her Stormwing's most effective pilot. The brief but intense confrontation ended with Barrett's neutralization and the preservation of both the stealth prototype and critical intelligence about his international network. Maya's tactical superiority was evident in every aspect of the engagement, from her positioning and timing to her exploitation of Barrett's psychological weaknesses. The skills that had once made her a legendary pilot translated seamlessly to ground combat operations that required similar precision and adaptability. Federal investigators who swept the facility in the aftermath of Barrett's capture discovered evidence that exceeded even Maya's expectations about the scope of the conspiracy. Barrett had been systematically selling classified military technology for nearly 5 years, with the stealth prototype representing only the most recent and valuable transaction in a long series of intelligence compromises. The financial records revealed payments totaling millions of dollars from foreign intelligence services seeking access to American technological capabilities. The international network that Barrett had established included intelligence operatives from multiple hostile nations, defense contractors with access to classified research programs, and corrupt military personnel who had provided insider access to protected facilities and information. The scope of the conspiracy represented one of the most serious intelligence breaches in modern American history, with implications that would require years of damage assessment and countermeasure development. Maya's role in exposing and stopping Barrett's conspiracy remained classified at levels that would protect her resumed anonymity, while ensuring that federal authorities understood the critical nature of her contribution. The intelligence she had provided had prevented catastrophic technology transfer, while preserving evidence necessary to dismantle Barrett's entire network of collaborators and buyers. The aftermath of the operation saw Barrett and his immediate subordinates facing charges that included espionage, treason, and conspiracy to provide aid to foreign adversaries. The evidence Maya had compiled ensured convictions that would result in life imprisonment without possibility of parole, sending a clear message to other military personnel who might consider monetizing their access to classified capabilities. Hawk's family was recovered safely from their captivity, reunited with their father in a secure federal facility where they could begin recovering from their ordeal. The reunion represented not only personal victory, but also confirmation that Barrett's leverage tactics had been completely neutralized. Sarah Mitchell and her daughters would receive federal protection and support as they readjusted to life free from the constant threat that had defined their existence during Barrett's conspiracy. Maya's return to Desert Springs came after extensive federal debriefing sessions that documented every aspect of Barrett's operation and her role in exposing it. The town appeared unchanged by the events that had transpired in the Nevada desert, its residents continuing their quiet lives without knowledge of the conspiracy that had threatened national security or the role their unassuming aircraft mechanic had played in preventing catastrophic intelligence loss. Emma Rodriguez resumed her civilian identity with enhanced security measures that reflected federal appreciation for her service, while maintaining her carefully constructed anonymity. The aircraft repair shop continued operating as before, serving the aviation needs of tourists and local residents who remained unaware that their mechanic had recently prevented the theft of America's most advanced stealth technology. The psychological impact of returning to active operations had been significant for Maya, forcing her to confront aspects of her identity that she had attempted to leave behind during 8 years of civilian life. The mission had reminded her of both the satisfaction and the cost of serving at the highest levels of national security, where individual actions could determine the fate of technological capabilities that shaped global military balance. Maya's reflection on the operation revealed how thoroughly her civilian life had changed her perspective on service and sacrifice. Emma Rodriguez valued community, stability, and the simple satisfaction of honest work, while Phoenix represented duty, excellence, and willingness to risk everything for abstract principles of national security. The integration of these two identities would define her path forward as someone who had chosen service over anonymity when the stakes demanded her unique capabilities. The encrypted communication from federal authorities that arrived 3 months after Barrett's conviction contained both gratitude for her service and assurance that her role would remain protected. The message also included an open invitation to consultation on future matters where her expertise might prove valuable, suggesting that complete retirement from government service might not be possible for someone with her unique combination of skills and experience. Maya's decision to maintain her civilian identity while remaining available for consultation represented a compromise between the life she had built and the service she had rendered. Desert Springs would continue to be her home, but Phoenix would remain ready to respond when national security required capabilities that only former Stormwing personnel possessed. The young pilot who appeared at her shop 6 months later carried herself with the nervous determination that Maya recognized from her own early military service. Lieutenant Jessica Barnes had been recruited for a classified aviation program whose parameters sounded disturbingly familiar to someone who had lived through Stormwing's rise and fall. The conversation that followed would determine whether the cycle of exploitation and betrayal would continue, or whether Maya's experience could help protect the next generation from Barrett's legacy. Maya's advice to Lieutenant Barnes was simple but profound. Maintain personal connections outside the program, document everything, and trust instincts about operations that seem designed to isolate rather than integrate participants. The wisdom came from 8 years of reflection on how elite programs could become vehicles for corruption when oversight was sacrificed for operational secrecy. The legend of Phoenix lived on, not in classified records or official recognition, but in the quiet strength of someone who had chosen principle over profit and community over glory. Maya Chen had returned to being Emma Rodriguez, but the desert still echoed with the memory of impossible missions flown by pilots who refused to let their country's technological superiority fall into hostile hands. As Maya returned to work on a tourist's aircraft engine, the satisfaction of honest labor was enhanced by knowledge that some fights were worth rejoining and some prices were worth paying. The stealth threat had been intercepted not by official channels or government programs, but by individuals who remembered their oaths and honored their commitments, regardless of personal cost. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.